July 31st, 1999, brought one sweltering, sticky Alabama night to the quiet roads that wrap around Ozark. 17-year-old Tracy Hollett made a quick call to her mother from a payphone outside the Big Little convenience store. She explained that she and her best friend JB Beasley were lost on their way to a field party. That innocuous-sounding phone call would prove to be the last time Tracy's voice was ever heard. Later, their black Mazda 8 gift from JB's father was found abandoned on Herring Avenue, less than a mile from that payphone. Inside the trunk, a horrifying discovery awaited. The lifeless bodies of Tracy and JB, two vibrant, ambitious young women, full of dreams for their senior year, had been brutally murdered. Any initial hope that the girls had simply run off or were delayed evaporated the instant authorities confirmed the grim truth. A predator had been there, someone careful, meticulous, leaving behind a nearly perfect crime scene with few immediate clues. For 23 years, the murders of J.B. Beasley and Tracy Hollett haunted Alabama families. Tracy's mother, Carol, and stepfather, Mike, and J.B.'s mother, Cheryl, and her sisters, were left to struggle with an unending void of questions and no answers. Before we go in deep with this story, take a second to hit that subscribe button and like this video. Sharing these stories helps ensure that voices that have otherwise been forgotten are heard, and yes, it's a good nudge for the algorithm gods to make sure you don't miss future uploads. The deaths of JB and Tracy sent a shiver across rural Alabama, leaving a chilling mark on the community, a reminder that danger can sometimes be well hidden in plain sight. Some 2 decades later, in 2019, murmurs of this old injustice finally found voice with advancements in DNA technology. This investigation brought with it not only the questions that lingered, but a flesh-and-blood perpetrator with a dark, dangerous past. A man who had quietly blended into Alabama communities for decades, hiding monstrous secrets behind a mask of normalcy. This case puts the spotlight on the determination of families who would not allow hope to die, detectives who would not allow time to eradicate the truth, and the astounding ability of forensic science today to provide a voice for those long-silenced Ozark itself, once a quiet, tight-knit community, would never be the same. Fear subtly crept down its streets. Neighbors started to look at each other with suspicion, and the comforting illusion of small-town safety was torn away, revealing a disturbing darkness that would eventually be laid bare. A key figure in this story lived for 23 long years among neighbors and citizens, blending into community events with a veneer of normal life, all while hiding unimaginable acts. Where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments below. I love seeing how far these stories reach and how they connect people across miles. Now let's walk through the events of July 1999, follow decades of unanswered questions, and uncover the breakthrough that finally brought a measure of justice for J.B. Beasley and Tracy Hollett. A story of loss, persistence, deception, and ultimately justice delayed, but not denied. The late 1990s in Ozark, Alabama moved at a gentle southern pace. Sunny days gave way to nights lit by the soft glow of twinkling fireflies. It was a tight-knit community, oak-lined streets echoing memories from generations before. Friendly faces greeted residents from porch swings, swaying in the warm breeze. The smell of hickory smoke from backyard barbecues mingled with honeysuckle vines, climbing weathered fences. Mornings began with the crow of roosters and boots hitting the pavement as neighbors made their way to the local diner, where sweet tea refills were endless, and the gossip flowed thicker than the grits. Evenings were for Friday night football. Cheering on the Wildcats under the bright lights of the field life was simple, warm, comfortable. People weren't just residents. They were threads in the fabric of a small town where everyone knew your name. Tracy Jean Hollett was born on March 3, 1982, about 30 minutes away in the town of Dothan, an only child born to Karen and Robert Bob. Hollett Bob was a popular Dothan police corporal and a veteran of Vietnam who drowned in a lake when Tracy was almost 5 years old. His sudden death created a void in Tracy, and her mother Karen would later remarry to Mike Roberts, having 2 sons, Benjamin and Christopher, and treated Tracy like his daughter. The family was very active in Heritage Baptist Church. Tracy frequently would attend youth groups, and she taught at Vacation Bible School. She had a caring, sharing personality and seldom argued with her parents. She enjoyed her brothers who were much younger than her. She was a bright student, always making the honor roll at Northview High School, where she was also a majorette and a member of the yearbook staff. Tracy had big aspirations to be a missionary doctor, a calling she developed after going on a mission trip with her church to Texas, where she saw how people struggled for basic health care. She started working at J.C. Penney and babysitting neighbors to save money for the future. Tracy shared a very special relationship with her mom, Carol, whom she would also at times refer to as her best friend. They loved shopping together, going for lunch, or just sharing a cup of coffee. Outgoing and bubbly, Tracy stood out with her near-constant smile and quick sense of humor that drew everyone in her large circle of friends, included a best friend, JB Beasley, who was in the same grade. Tracy and JB had much in common. Both were active in their church youth group. Both were friendly, hardworking, and outgoing. Both girls even competed in the Miss Spectrum beauty pageant, placing within the top 10. Family and friends described them as beautiful inside and out. J.B. Hilton Green Beasley was born on July 31, 1982, in Troy, Alabama, to Cheryl and Hilton Lanyard Beasley. J.B.'s unique name combined her father's name with that of his close friend from childhood, James Buford Green. She would go through life using her initials, J.B. She had one older sister, Liv, 7 years her senior. Her parents divorced, and her mother, Cheryl, eventually married Joseph Bernard Barron and had 4 more daughters, Jamie Brooke, Jackie Bernice, Jo Beth, and Jillian. All shared the initials JBB, a quirky family tradition. Tragedy had already visited JB's life in May 1994, when her older sister Liv died at the tender age of 19. That made JB the big sister and a guardian to her younger siblings, something she took very seriously. Lindsay Turner, JB's cousin, remembered JB as kind and patient. She babysat her sisters often and even prepared lunches for them, showing the depths to which she cared for and looked out for them. Like many teens of the 1990s, JB had her passions and her quirks. She loved country music and was singularly obsessed with Bath & Body Works Cucumber Melon scent, which she wore religiously. She and her sisters, along with their mother, even modeled for department stores, once strutting the runway together for a Mother's Day fashion show. But dance was JB's true love. She excelled in ballet, jazz, lyrical, and tap, garnering numerous awards and being named an All-American cheerleader. Her sister Jo Beth described her as an angel gliding on stage, someone destined to dance. After high school, JB had planned on continuing to dance at Texas Christian University. But JB was more than a dancer. She stayed on the honor roll, was a member of the Future Business Leaders of America, and still managed to find time for shopping, tanning, and hanging out with friends and family. She worked as a file clerk and receptionist at Southern Clinic, where she became known for befriending patients in July 1999. She even landed a job as a dance instructor, a dream role she sadly never got the chance to begin. Saturday, July 31st, 1999 was JB's 17th birthday. She and Tracy were both eagerly preparing for their upcoming senior year, which would begin in just a few days on August 3rd. At the time, Cheryl and JB's stepfather, Joe, were divorced but shared custody of the kids, so the girls regularly moved from one household to the other. The girls were at Joe's house that weekend, but were set to go back to Cheryl's the next Sunday to celebrate JB's birthday in the end of summer. That night, JB and Tracy had plans to go to a field party. She was going to spend the night at Tracy's house and then go to church with her the next morning, which would put her home in plenty of time for Jackie's 10th birthday party. Later that afternoon, JB wouldn't have missed that party for anything in the world. She knew how much it meant to her sister. The two friends left Tracy's home in JB's black 1994 Mazda 929, a gift from her dad, around 10 p.m., en route to a field party in Headland, about 20 miles northeast of Dothan. With Tracy's curfew being very strict at 11:30 p.m., and with no GPS, the navigation was tricky along the zigzagging country roads. In all, round trips would take approximately 17 to 20 minutes each way, leaving them barely an hour at the party if they wanted to make curfew. Clearly, they were planning on seeking forgiveness rather than permission, but fate had other plans. They never made it to the party. Lost and sans cell phones, they had to find a payphone. Just after 11:30 p.m., they spotted a gas station with an attached convenience store called the Big Little at 763 East Broad Street in Ozark, a small town of about 15,000 people. This was roughly 23 miles northwest of their homes in Dothan, far off course from Headland. The store was closed, but a payphone was available. Tracy used it to call her mother, Carol, explaining that they had gotten lost. Meanwhile, another car pulled up, a mother and daughter, who gave the girls directions back to Dothan. Once Tracy understood the route, she relayed it to her mother. Then she asked if she and JB could quickly stop by her boyfriend Wade's house in Midland City on the way home. This would have been about halfway between Ozark and Dothan. Carol agreed to this, but only on one strict condition. It had to be for only 5 minutes. As she said, the 11:30 p.m. curfew had already passed. Tracy agreed, replying with, "I love you." Following that, she called Wade and arranged to meet at his house. Carol said she expected the girls to be back sometime after midnight, but as the hours crept by, her concern evolved into alarm. She began calling around, trying to determine the girls' whereabouts and who might be with Tracy and JB. That weekend, Carol wasn't particularly close with JB's mother or stepfather. JB's mom, Cheryl, didn't have the kids that night. She worked in a tennis shop at a country club and was playing in a tournament herself that evening, which didn't let out until around 10 p.m. It just so happened that was right about the time the girls were leaving town, heading unknowingly toward Ozark. Since he was out of town, Cheryl stopped by a friend's house after work to feed his dog. Shortly before 10:30 p.m., she decided to check out a local block party at a popular downtown Dothan restaurant and pub called Poplar Head. She hoped she might run into JB and Tracy to wish her daughter a happy birthday in person. Of course, throughout the night, Cheryl scanned the crowd for them, but never saw them. Without cell phones, even if Tracy's mom had called Cheryl's house, she wouldn't have been home to pick up. The last time Cheryl and JB had spoken was on Thursday night, 2 nights before her birthday. They discussed plans for Friday night. Before he left, Cheryl had given her a special birthday wish, quoting the Bob Dylan song, "Forever Young." She wanted JB to understand the importance of remaining young at heart, believing her daughter had a special spirit which should never grow old, to make the message more poignant. Cheryl gave JB a copy of the song, encouraging her to listen to the lyrics and even choreograph a dance routine to it. No one could have imagined what Tracy and JB were in store for that night. Finally, she was able to reach Wade, Tracy's boyfriend, and he was informing her of even more unsettling news. The girls never arrived at the Midland City gas station they planned to meet him at. They and their friends waited at least 30 minutes until finally leaving. Later, he called Tracy at home, but there was no answer. Hours passed, and there was no word from the girls. Carol even began calling local hospitals, hoping they might have been admitted, but there was no sign of them. Tracy's stepfather, Mike, went out to search parking lots, roads, and areas all around town, but he found nothing. There was no sign of the girls or JB's car. When he returned empty-handed, Carol knew it was time to escalate. She called the Dothan Police Department to report the girls missing. It was now 8 a.m. on Sunday, August 1st. Carol provided the police with all the details. When the girls had left, the kind of car they were driving, and the last time she had spoken with Tracy, around 11:30 p.m. the night before. Meanwhile, Cheryl, JB's mom, didn't have a clue that anything was amiss. At about 9:15 a.m., the phone rang. It was JB's dance teacher, wanting to know who was responsible for JB over the weekend. Cheryl thought that was a strange question. When she asked why the teacher asked this, it was dismissed with, "Oh, it's nothing." The remark disturbed Cheryl, but having no specific reason to worry, she went on about her day, going to the country club. Still, the unease lingered. A family friend approached Cheryl and informed her that JB and Tracy hadn't returned to Tracy's house the previous night. At first, it was easy to hope the girls had simply stayed with friends, enjoying themselves. Like most parents, Cheryl tried not to think the worst. She spent hours calling friends, trying to gather information, and eventually reached the police, desperate to learn anything about her missing daughter. But no one seemed to know where they were. Earlier that morning, around 9 a.m., a patrol officer in Ozark was doing his routine rounds. Unaware of the girl's disappearance during his patrol, he noticed a black Mazda parked on the side of Herring Avenue, looking abandoned. Herring Avenue was a narrow road, often used by locals as a shortcut, surrounded by dense woods on both sides, meaning it would have been very dark the night before. Why had the girls stopped there? Had they run out of gas? And where were they now? At the time, he didn't know it belonged to JB or that it might be connected to missing teens. He merely reported it as abandoned. Around 10 a.m., the pieces began to fall into place. The Ozark Police Department were able to determine that the girls had contacted Carol from the payphone at the Big Little store on East Broad Street. They matched the description of the abandoned Mazda to the report and immediately sent officers to the location. The car was locked, though the driver's side window was slightly cracked, and it looked as if it might have run out of gas. The Mazda was muddy, but it didn't appear to have been forced off the road, and there was no visible exterior damage. A purse was on the floor of the front passenger seat. With the doors locked, officers had no choice but to break a window with a baton. Once inside, they found JB's driver's license wedged between the seat and the center console. Her purse still contained credit cards, cash, and jewelry. This was an early but important clue. Robbery clearly wasn't the motive, and no one seemed to have forced their way into the car. Police had a description of JB's keyring, which included little white blocks with black letters. One even had a heart and spelled out, "hard to get." The officers searched in the vehicle, including under the seats, but were unable to locate the keys. Without them, they couldn't open the locked trunk to continue searching for clues. They went a step further and brought in a metal detector to scan the outside area, but the keys remained missing. At this point, the Ozark officers contacted the Dothan Police Department. A detective came to the scene, and concern grew, not just because the car was connected to the missing teens, but because there were multiple red flags. The Mazda was filthy, as though it had been driven off-road, with mud on the rear bumper and wheel wells, and even dry sand and mud inside. Yet there were no dirt roads nearby, only a narrow footpath leading into dense woods. Smudge marks on one of the back doors appeared to be a handprint, heightening the unease. The detectives were desperate to get into the trunk. They searched for an internal release button and were even ready to call a locksmith if necessary. Meanwhile, back in Dothan, JB's little sister Jackie was getting ready for her pool birthday party. 3 cousins had flown in from Japan to spend the last days of summer with the family, and everyone was excited for the celebration. But Jackie noticed that her dad seemed distracted in and out of the house all morning, preoccupied. She worried they'd be late for the party. When they finally arrived, the fun began. But Jackie quickly realized that JB hadn't shown up, and her dad was still acting strangely. Something didn't feel right. Later that afternoon, when the girls returned home, the tension in the house was impossible to ignore. Their grandmother was in her room, the door closed, speaking in an intense tone. Little 7-year-old Jo Beth could sense the unease, but no one explained anything to the children. The adults were keeping them busy, shielding them from the grim reality that their older sister was missing. Meanwhile, back in Ozark, the detectives were getting ready to have the Mazda towed to Dothan. While taking a closer look around the car, someone finally noticed that the trunk could be opened with the internal release button, an almost comically simple mechanism that was on the driver's side door right next to the gas tank release. Observers would later puzzle over how such a small detail had delayed the investigation, but at last they popped the trunk. Inside was a scene that would forever haunt anyone who saw it. Both JB and Tracy lay lifeless, side by side. The case had now tragically shifted from a missing person investigation to a homicide. The girls were fully clothed, with mud covering their clothing. Rigor mortis had already peaked and was beginning to diminish, making it difficult to pinpoint the exact time of death. The heat didn't help. Records showed it had been around 100 degrees that day, with overnight temperatures never dropping below 81 degrees. What had happened to JB and Tracy? The police wouldn't know for sure until the bodies were removed and taken to the medical examiner for autopsies. Meanwhile, both families were being notified of the devastating news. When Cheryl, JB's mother, found out, she immediately began to vomit. She couldn't fathom that her little girl had been killed on her birthday. She imagined JB reaching out in her final moments, calling for her mom, and it was unbearable to think she wasn't there. Shock and despair consumed her, leaving her world shattered in an instant. Over the ensuing hours, friends and family gathered to console Cheryl. At approximately 6 p.m., Jackie remembered her grandmother screaming in her room, then crying, No one, however, had talked explicitly with the kids about what had occurred. Jackie later recalled the moment when her dad finally took the girls to their mother's house. As we got close, I immediately noticed the slow funeral sign sitting in the yard. My dad kept reassuring us that everything was okay, but I knew better. I asked him if my mom was dead, and he said, "No, she's okay." My dad walked us into the house, and I saw my mother sitting on the floor crying, with people all around her. She grabbed us and put her arms around us, looking at us all. She looked at her mother's face and heard the words that would bring her world crashing down. "JB is dead." She couldn't understand what she was being told. The words hit so hard she couldn't even speak. All she could do was move silently through the house, waiting, hoping her sister would walk through the door any minute. Jackie was awakened the following morning by the sound of a shower, and for one brief second had thought it was JB. Then it hit her. She was never coming back. Her world had been turned upside down, and nothing would ever again be the same. The last thing Jackie remembered about JB was the morning before her birthday. JB had given her a big hug, telling Jackie she'd see her at her party the next day. "I remember her hugging me and saying she loved me," Jackie recalled later. "That was the last time I heard her sweet voice. I will never forget it." JB's family had now endured not one, but two devastating losses. Years apart, two of Cheryl's daughters were gone. Jamie Brooke, the oldest sister now, slid into the big sister role that JB had held for a few short years after Liv's death. The household of four sisters was suddenly one sister smaller. No more battles in the bathroom getting ready for school in the morning. Little Jo Beth was only 7 at the time and would never forget that day. "I walked into my mom's house and saw everyone surrounding our mother, crying," she remembered. "That's when we got the most devastating news. I was so young. I didn't really understand what was happening. I couldn't believe I wouldn't see my sister again. It was so hard to understand." JB's cousin Lindsay, who had been at Auburn University when the news came, was equally distraught. "I wanted to stay at my parents' house until we got more news, but I had papers due. My parents insisted I head back to Auburn, promising to keep me updated," she explained. That afternoon was torture. Waiting for any news, she somehow managed to finish her papers, but felt numb. Then just as she got out of the shower, dressed and ready to call home, there was a knock at the door. Her brother and sister-in-law were there, and she knew immediately. "The look on my brother's face, it was like someone had kicked me in the stomach. The pain would never stop," Lindsay said later. "I've had terrible days in my life, including a head-on collision with an 18-wheeler. But the day we lost JB is by far the worst." Meanwhile, back in Dothan, Tracy's mother Carol and stepfather Mike had received the worst news any parent could get. Both girls had been found, and they were gone. Years later, Cheryl would say it felt strange that Carol and Mike never called to mourn with them. The two families would never grow particularly close in the aftermath of their son's tragedy. There was some speculation that Carol might have held some resentment, given that it was JB's birthday, and that Tracy, perhaps more follower than leader, had merely followed along with whatever JB had wanted to do that night. The unspoken dynamics of grief and blame and loss hung silent between them. Back at the scene, officers carefully examined the Mazda as they prepared to transport the bodies. They found a 9mm shell casing lying across one of Tracy's knees. From the way the bodies were positioned, it looked like Tracy had been forced into the trunk first. She had a single gunshot wound to the temple, a cut on her arm, and briar thorns stuck to her pant legs. She was still wearing a brand new pair of New Balance shoes her parents had bought just a week prior, now coated in thick mud. JB had a gunshot wound to her cheek, her shoes were covered in mud, and both girls' pants were wet from the knees down. Police concluded from evidence inside the trunk that the girls had been killed after being forced inside, but not at that location. Several things indicated this, including the indentation where Tracy's head had rested, along with the placement of the shell casing near JB's head, and blood dripping under the car, indicating bullets had passed through the trunk at another site. Dried blood on the ground and a small trail leading to a puddle reinforced the theory that the car had been moved to Herring Avenue, hours after the murder. Inside, more clues began to come up. Mud and sand were mostly on the driver's side of the floor. It also appeared that the killer drove the car to Herring Avenue and abandoned it there. The keys were gone, and JB's rearview mirror hung precariously to the passenger side floor. Every piece added to the grim puzzle that was a careful and calculated crime. The condition of the car, the way it was parked, the disarray of its interior, suggested there had been a struggle inside. It would have taken considerable force to dislodge the rearview mirror onto the passenger side floor. Investigators checked for fingerprints, but the only ones found belonged to the two officers who had previously searched the vehicle before knowing the girls were murdered. Realizing the complexity of the case, Ozark police called in reinforcements. The Alabama Bureau of Investigation was among those who joined to assist, along with the FBI. Meanwhile, autopsies were conducted on the girls by Dr. Gregory Wagner. Dr. Wagner's examination revealed that JB had been shot in the face at close range and died instantly as a result of a brainstem injury. The presence of gunpowder stippling on her hand indicated that when fired, the firearm was indeed very close. Though Dr. Wagner could not determine exactly how close, the presence of mud on her shoes and the inside of her jeans indicated her pants had been removed at some point, perhaps indicating a sexual motive. Tracy had been shot in the temple. Dr. Wagner did note gunpowder stippling on the back of her right hand and estimated the gun had been about 2 feet away when fired, with her hand close to her head rather than outstretched. Both girls' shoes and jeans were muddy. Tracy's shoes showed traces of blood. Toxicology reports revealed no drugs or alcohol in either girl's system, but both had numerous scratches and abrasions on their arms. There were no initial outward signs of forced sexual assault, such as tear marks to the genital region. However, subsequent testing provided some conflicting results. Vaginal swabs from JB tested positive for semen, while Tracy's did not. Other clothing and underwear tests indicated semen on JB's bra, underwear, and sweater, and blood on the sweater. A DNA profile was completed from this evidence and entered into CODIS pending a match. With autopsies completed, police directed their attention to retracing the girls' last known movements. The last anyone had heard from them was around 11:30 p.m. when Tracy called her mother from the Big Little store in Ozark. The girls had mentioned that two women gave them directions home. Police soon identified those women as Marilyn Merritt, and her daughter Marielle told investigators that around 11:30 p.m. on July 31st, she and her mother had stopped at the Big Little store for a soda. When they arrived, the parking lot held just one car. A black Mazda Marielle approached the store but found the doors locked. Around 11 p.m., as she turned to leave, JB approached her. JB explained that her friend was using the payphone on the far right of the lot and that they were lost. Marielle gave initial directions to U.S. Highway 231, and Marilyn added a few landmarks to help. They made certain the girls successfully connected with someone on the phone before leaving. When police asked if the Mazda was dirty or if the girls looked disheveled, both women said no. The car was spotless, and the girls appeared perfectly clean. Nothing seemed out of place, except that the teens were clearly lost. They watched as JB and Tracy got into their car and pulled toward the highway as instructed. In contrast, other information from JB's family revealed that she had filled her gas tank on Saturday before leaving for the trip. But when the Mazda was found, it was almost empty. Herring Avenue, where the car was found, wasn't on the route back to Dothan, raising even more questions as to how it came to be there. Thankfully, the Big Little store did have security cameras. Surveillance footage was obtained by police from inside and outside of the store to confirm the girls had indeed been there. The system didn't record continuously. It rotated 12 seconds in the store, then 12 seconds in the parking lot, and so on. The footage was sent off for splicing and enhancement, focusing only on the outside of the store. When the enhanced footage came back, the quality was still poor, but investigators could make out JB and Tracy at the payphone, confirming Marielle and Marilyn's account. They also made out something else, a brief image of a white, foreign-made mid-size pickup truck that pulled up shortly after the women had arrived. The truck remained at a pump for about 3 minutes before driving off, just before JB's car left. Because the store was closed, no one could have paid for gas during that time, either by credit or debit card. And the camera didn't capture any clear images of the driver, leaving the identity of the person behind the wheel a complete mystery. The police were unable to glean any information regarding the white truck, despite their best efforts. They appealed to the public for assistance, but nobody came forward. The released image was so blurry that, quite literally, it looked like little more than a shapeless blob, making identification nearly impossible. With the timeline for the girls pieced together, investigators were determined to find where and rifle the girls were shot. An early lead had them looking down Highway 123, just west of the Big Little store, where a resident reported hearing gunshots at about 2:15 a.m. The police indeed found shell casings on the road, though further analysis proved they weren't a match. The search was painstaking and methodical, but no one could pin down exactly where JB and Tracy had been killed. By August 8th, only a week after the bodies were found, police had established a hotline to call in tips, offered a $25,000 reward, and hung flyers of the girls and the Mazda throughout town. They spoke with over 150 people and followed countless leads. Yet progress remained painfully slow. By August 18th, the reward had risen to more than $35,000 and 3 FBI profilers joined the case, but there was still no breakthrough. On September 1st, police released the surveillance footage of the white truck, hoping someone might recognize it, but no one ever came forward. Then came a noteworthy tip. It was John William Barentine, a 28-year-old part-time mechanic, who had some news. On the night of July 31st, the same night JB and Tracy got lost in Ozark, John told his wife he was going to the store for milk for their 2-year-old son. According to her, he didn't return until nearly 1 a.m. When he walked through the door, he seemed visibly upset. Asked what happened, John said, "I was hit by a black truck with a Dothan tag near Herring Avenue." The connection was immediately obvious. JB was from Dothan, and her black Mazda had been found on Herring Avenue. But it was a car, not a truck, and there was no damage suggesting an accident. Over the next several days, John started to tell friends and family members that he thought he knew something about the 2 murdered girls. He told a friend, Leon Jordan, that he suspected he knew the killer. Leon urged him to report it, especially in light of the reward for information leading to an arrest. On September 1st, Leon learned that police were interrogating John at the station house. The next morning, September 2nd, the Ozark police had an announcement that everyone had been waiting to hear. An arrest had been made. It came as a complete shock to many, as the man arrested was no other than John Barentine, the same man they had just interrogated. Initially, the police would not say how John was linked to the murders. Ozark Police Chief Tony Spivey said at a news conference he couldn't disclose a great deal, though he was certain they had the right suspect. He explained that the investigation was ongoing, and the motive wasn't known yet. The only thing he disclosed was that John didn't know the girls, and that it seemed like it was a crime of opportunity. Present at the press conference were John's mother and 3 sisters, who looked visibly upset. Angered by what they said was police holding back evidence that linked him to the crime, his family members insisted he wasn't involved. The family described John as a little odd and somewhat of a loner, but not a killer. One of his sisters, Jennifer, said police were trying to pin someone else's crime on him. According to Angela, another sister, John had left home on the night the murders occurred, but only for 15 minutes to get milk. She said he was soft-hearted, could not bear to see any woman cry, and he did not own a gun. Just about everyone who knew John was in disbelief when word began to spread that he was under arrest. A neighbor described him as a little strange, but never violent and always friendly. A regular at the service station where John worked called him kind and patient, someone who never frightened anybody. Even his boss harbored doubts and said he wanted to know what evidence police had against John and why it wasn't being shared. Days later, the investigation would take another turn. But at this point, the town of Ozark was stunned, struggling to reconcile the mild-mannered mechanic they thought they knew with the horrific murders of JB and Tracy. As of September 9th, it still remained vague as to how John was related to these murders. Chief Spivey reiterated the questions in everybody's mind, but said he could not give any more information at that particular juncture, considering the investigation was still ongoing. He, however, remained optimistic that law enforcement had arrested the right suspect. On September 20th, a preliminary hearing was held to decide if the state had sufficient evidence to prosecute John Barentine. For the first time, anyone outside of law enforcement got a look at the case against him. During testimony, police said a pivotal tip emerged several days after JB and Tracy were murdered. A video store clerk came forward and said he had recorded a conversation he had with a man identifying himself as John. According to the clerk, John had wanted to view some surveillance tapes from the Big Little store. He said there was a fight on July 31st, and he needed the footage to determine exactly when the fight had occurred. The clerk found it suspicious that John was asking about the very night and location where the girls were last seen, near the site of a murder, so he recorded the conversation. The clerk didn't know John's last name, but he knew the man had an account under Mary or Barry Barentine, listing an address of 109 Young Avenue in Ozark. Police initially couldn't find that address, but did locate a Mary Barentine at 110 Young Avenue, who was married to a man named John. When questioned, Mary originally stated that John had left around 11 p.m. to buy milk for their son and was only gone 15 minutes. She later recanted her statement, saying she wasn't sure because John had taken her watch with him. She then proposed that when he came back, it could have been an hour or two. She remembers John telling her that he'd been forced off the road by a black truck near James and Herring Avenue. The very area where JB's Mazda was found. Police then spoke with John at his workplace about this alleged black truck. He said that when he left for milk, he took a longer route down James Street to Grocery Outlet. He said a black truck with tinted windows and a partial tag. 38 came off Herring Avenue, hit his car, and drove on to Matthew Street. John said that he arrived at Grocery Outlet at 11:35 p.m., checked behind him to see if the truck was following, and once home, couldn't sleep. He said he took a shower, watched Rocky III until 3 a.m., and then used a rag to buff out the supposed damage to his car. Over the next several days, John told friends and family that he had a feeling the black truck might have something to do with the murders because of the proximity of time and location. Police requested to see the rag, which they hoped would have black paint on it, but John didn't bring it. However, he showed them where it happened, and a trained officer in accident investigation examined the car and found no signs of damage. It looked like it never had been hit. When confronted, John acknowledged, "You're right, I lied. I just wanted to collect the reward money." Police questioned him about the truth of the night of July 31st. During a 4-hour videotaped interview, John changed his story at least 6 times. First, he said he was at home all night. Mary, simultaneously being questioned, said otherwise. She knew he had certainly left for milk. John then took a trip to the BP gas station on US 231 for 20 minutes, and on his way home past the Big Little store, where he said he saw JB and Tracy on the payphone. Then John produced another, extended version. A tattooed man who worked for his uncle and who lived in the neighborhood was the killer. John said he had picked the man up at a 4-way stop as they passed the Big Little store. The man allegedly saw JB and Tracy and suggested that John let him get some. Immediately, detectives perked up. That sounded like the sexual motive they'd been suspecting. John said he had pulled into the store parking lot, and the tattooed man approached the girls while one of them was still on the phone. He claimed the man then climbed into the back seat of the Mazda while the girls were still there. According to John, the girls drove off with this man in their car, and he followed, thinking the man might need a ride. The Mazda finally stopped on Herring Avenue. John testified that he parked on James Street, turned off his lights, and killed his engine. For some reason, he said he could hear the conversation between the man and the girls. According to John, the tattooed man and the girl driving the Mazda got out of the car. John testified he heard the girl say, "I thought you were going to give us directions. What are we?" John's story continued to twist and turn in ways that had investigators scratching their heads. He said that after the tattooed man approached the girls, the passenger girl tried to run, but he grabbed her and dragged her back toward the car. According to John, he watched as both girls were forced into the trunk and heard 2 gunshots. He then said the man ran to John's car and told him to get inside, clutching the Mazda keys in one hand and a gun in the other. John claimed they drove around for a while before he let the man out somewhere in Ozark. It was a dramatic story, and many details seemed to fit with known facts, but it begged the question, how could he have known so much? Several of the details that John shared had already been reported in newspapers. Despite his bizarre tales of another man being involved, police decided to arrest John. He had placed himself at the scene where the girls were last seen, and he seemed to know far too much for it to be a coincidence. He was charged with 2 counts of capital murder. Police testified in the preliminary hearing that they investigated the story of the tattooed man. Eventually, they eliminated this man as a suspect when 3 people verified he was elsewhere the night of the murders. At this point, detectives were convinced John had been involved, likely alongside another unknown person. Following John's arrest, a cell inmate swore that John had confessed to the murders, adding another layer of evidence for the prosecution. The defense for John argued, however, that there were too many gaps to justify going any further. They said that there was no motive, no evidence that John owned a gun, that the murder weapon was never found, and that no physical evidence tied him to the crimes. At this point, DNA evidence had been processed and placed in CODIS, but there was no match. The detectives still felt that John had an unknown accomplice, and perhaps he wasn't the one who was involved in any sexual assault. John had recanted his stories, saying he had only gone to the police for the reward money. The prosecution countered that the police had gone to him after the clerk from the video store came forward, not the other way around. At the end of the hearing, Judge Buddy Matthews deemed that enough evidence had been presented to continue holding John in custody until the case could be referred to the grand jury in January 2000. By mid-October, John was in front of a judge to determine if he should stay in jail without bail. In a surprise maneuver, his attorney put John on the stand. John acknowledged that he had lied about everything, about having seen the girls killed, about the tattooed man, and about all the tales he had told. He said he had only made up the stories to get reward money and that he had been confused and tired during the long interrogation at the police station. Even so, the judge sided with the prosecution and ordered John to remain in jail without bail, while also compelling him to provide a DNA sample to be tested against the semen on JB. Friends and family rallied around him. His mother, Faye, insisted he was incapable of such a crime, underlining that he had a young son and could never harm a child. In early November, John's attorney announced the DNA did not match. Police still said that they suspected John and an unknown accomplice might be involved. With this news, Judge McLean lowered John's bail to $200,000, which John somehow posted in mid-December. On January 10, 2000, the grand jury refused to indict John on murder charges. At first, police indicated they might continue investigating him, but then they formally cleared him of suspicion, restarting the case. It appeared a considerable amount of time was spent pursuing a man who ultimately was unrelated to the crime. The community looked for many ways to remember the memory of JB and Tracy. A memorial fund was set up in JB's name at Compass Bank in Dothan to underwrite a free performing arts camp for underprivileged children and to fund an annual piece of choreography each year in her honor. Teachers, parents, and students from her dance school were deeply involved, driven by a desire to celebrate her life and bring joy to others. The greater community came out in support as well. Central Phoenix High School, a rival to Northview High where JB and Tracy had attended, showed their support in a very touching way. They sent a banner to Northview at their first pep rally after the murders, in solidarity and compassion for the grieving families. The gesture by Central Phoenix High School, rivals to Northview High, was, under tragic circumstances, a touching display of unity and compassion. Only a few months into the new year, in February 2002, another tragedy struck teenage girls in Mississippi. Amanda Welburn and Kelsey Bullock were found shot in the back of the head and left by the side of the road. Initially, police investigated a possible connection to JB and Tracy's murders. But after thorough investigation, they determined there wasn't one. 2 men, Paul Evans Jr. and Nathan Townsend, were eventually arrested, convicted, and sentenced for those murders. Other leads turned up in the JB and Tracy case, including one from Battle Creek. Michigan police did not release his name, but said he was at a party near the site where JB's car was found and left town shortly after the murders. Investigators went to Michigan multiple times to follow up on that lead, but the man couldn't account for a 3 to 4 hour period on the night of the murders. His statements were suspicious, but his DNA didn't match what was found at the crime scene, and police had to move on. By the 1-year mark, the case was going cold. Cheryl, JB's mother, was determined to keep her daughter and Tracy in the public eye. She hit on the idea of putting their photos on utility bills, envelopes, and in public spaces like sports complexes. She also asked the city to donate the Civic Center for a charity ball in honor of the girls, with proceeds going toward funding billboards to keep their case visible. Meanwhile, Tracy's parents, Mike and Carol Roberts, erected a memorial to the girls at the place where their bodies were discovered. With two white crosses, the crosses were stolen for the second time in August 2000. Mike laid a third in quick-dry cement. He was determined to see justice served in his stepdaughter's case. A sticker on his truck read, "Someone I loved was murdered." That same month, America's Most Wanted aired a special on the case. The show's host, John Walsh, journeyed to Dothan, Alabama, to stage a reenactment of the murders as the mysterious white pickup truck was seen near the Big Little store, around the time JB and Tracy made their last phone call. Cheryl hadn't known her daughter's murder would be dramatized and said it was really scary to watch. The segment called in a slew of tips, but nothing of any substance came from them. A December 2000 tip to crime, stoppers indicated the murder weapon was submerged 6 to 8 feet underwater in a creek in northern Dale County. Divers spent several days hand-searching, but never found the weapon. Cheryl continued raising awareness, including an appearance on the Maury Povich Show in January 2001, in a segment called "I Need to Solve My Child's Murder." Cheryl was joined by 4 other parents in telling her story. She was very courageous and determined in her pursuit of justice. Despite the ongoing investigations into numerous suspects, years went by, and the murders remained unsolved. Friends and family of JB and Tracy held on to hope, coming together to visit each year on the anniversary of their deaths at the location where the car was found. 16 years later, in 2015, the Thursday Review ran 2 in-depth write-ups on the case. The articles featured an interview with JB's sisters, Jo Beth, Jackie, Jillian, her mother Cheryl, and her cousin Lindsay, about who JB was and the events that happened on that day. The feature included a photo of Jillian, 20, Jo Beth, 23, Jackie, 26, and Jamie, 27, posing with a portrait of their late sister JB, who would have turned 33 years old that year. The family promised to never lose hope that her killer would be found. Jackie shared that every time the clock struck 11:11, she thought of JB because he always would stop and say, "Make a wish." Q. Do you think that JB might have known her killer? A. It could have been someone they knew. Or maybe it was an unknown person that they crossed. Jackie, JB's younger sister, knows her sister would never have pulled over for anyone else at that time of night. She and other family members kept the memory alive, putting up a Facebook page for JB and Tracy that gained almost 4,000 members. They sold vinyl stickers that said "Justice for JB and Tracy," using the money to promote awareness of the case. They held fundraisers, such as car washes and 5Ks, to help their cause and demonstrate that they will never give up. Cheryl, JB's mother, reflected on the lasting impact of the tragedy. Even 16 years later, she was living in the same area. In 2006, she graduated from Troy University with a Bachelor of Science in Criminal Justice. Cheryl cited strained relationships with her other daughters since the murder of JB. She loved her other daughters very much. However, the resemblance of one daughter to JB made it difficult emotionally, further entrenching the rippling results of her daughter's death. As the 20th anniversary of the unsolved murders of JB and Tracy approached, the Ozark Police Department became determined to solve the case. Willing to explore every possible avenue, they enlisted Parabon Nanolabs, which specialized in genetic genealogy. Using advanced DNA sequencing techniques and genealogy databases, Parabon would identify potential suspects by tracing their familial connections. After a great deal of analysis, the lab whittled the number down to only 5 of the suspects. One name in particular jumped out at Ozark Chief Marlos Walker, Coy Lewis McRae. The chief remembered that he and Coy had gone to high school together in Dothan. Reviewing the files, Chief Walker discovered that Coy, who had been only 23 at the time of the murders, had never been questioned. With no criminal record, his DNA would not have been in CODIS, meaning any match would have been impossible at the time investigators looked into Coy's history. Born in 1974 in Quincy, Florida, he moved to Ozark, Alabama when he was young. He grew up with 3 older sisters. His dad was a carpenter, and his mom worked at a nursing home. During his junior year at Carroll High School, Coy started dating a woman named Zafri. They had a child before graduating in 1992. married that year, and had another child. Coy then went into the Air Force, stationed in Mississippi, and registered a 9mm pistol, the same kind of gun used to kill JB and Tracy. Following his divorce from Zaffrey and his general discharge from the military, Coy lived in various places including Ocean Springs, New York, before eventually moving back to Ozark to live with his mother. He worked a number of different jobs before moving into the semi-truck industry. By 1997, he was dating Diana and had another child. He became a long-haul trucker, often spending weeks on the road at a time, and settled into a home on Lindy Drive in Ozark, only about half a mile from both the Big Little Store and Herring Avenue, the sites linked to JB and Tracy's final movements. Coy's DNA ultimately became the critical piece of evidence, matching the semen found inside JB's body. His proximity to the locations of the crime and his DNA evidence made him a prime suspect. Prior to the murders, Coy had been ordered to take a DNA test for a paternity case on July 30th, 1999, the day before JB and Tracy were killed, but he refused, opting instead to pay child support without providing the sample. Over the following years, Coy faced multiple child support petitions but continued his life, eventually marrying Jeanette in 2001, having 2 more children, and running a religious nonprofit called Spirit and Truth Lifeline Ministries, serving as a bishop and preacher in Dothan. Yet notwithstanding the outward appearance of living a law-abiding life, questions persisted. Could Coy Lewis McRae have committed the murders? In January 2019, Chief Walker reached out to 45-year-old Coy and requested he submit his DNA in an attempt to develop a family tree of suspects in the case. After speaking with his wife, who told him, "You have nothing to hide," he agreed to cooperate. When Coy Lewis McRae's DNA was compared to the semen found on JB Beasley's body and clothing in late February, a definitive match was made. The odds of the semen belonging to anyone else were astronomically low, 1 in 122 nonillion. That's 122 followed by 30 zeros. This confirmed that Coy had sexual contact with JB, but it did not directly prove he had committed murder. Investigators noted there was no known connection between Coy and either JB or Tracy, no romantic involvement, no mutual friends, making the presence of his DNA on JB especially alarming. While preparations for his arrest were being made, Coy was kept under police surveillance. He was arrested on March 15th and brought to the station for questioning. Detectives first asked him if he knew anything about the murders of JB and Tracy. Coy replied that he had heard about it in town, but that he had never met either girl. After further questioning, detectives told him that his DNA was found on JB's body. Coy visibly reacted, taking a deep breath while turning his face away and mumbling, "This can't be happening." Detective Michael Bryan began to walk him through the facts, asking Coy to start from the beginning. Coy asked for an attorney multiple times, but Bryan responded, "Let me explain something to you. There's no lawyer that can change any facts of this case. All I want is the complete truth." He presented Coy with a series of photos. First his own family, then the autopsy pictures of JB and Tracy. Coy kept asking for a lawyer, but Bryan spoke calmly and reassured him, "We can do the lawyer if you want. Absolutely. I just want you to be aware of the facts. Your DNA matches the DNA found on JB Beasley's body." Bryan also informed Coy that he would let the district attorney know that Coy was suspected of kidnapping, sexually assaulting, and murdering the girls. An incredulous Coy replied, "Come on, man," and broke down in tears several times, proclaiming, "I never hurt anyone, ever." After tense moments in the interview, it finally concluded. He has remained in custody since being told he would be charged for 5 counts of capital murder and a first-degree sex crime. The police also questioned Coy's wife, Jeanette. She acknowledged the DNA match, but stated that it only proved a sexual encounter with JB. It did not prove he committed murder. Jeanette stood up for him, describing him as a family man who cared for his children and instilled strong values in them. Many in the community were similarly shocked. Chief Walker, who knew Coy personally, expressed surprise. "Every person I talked to said the same thing, but DNA doesn't lie." Meanwhile, Tracy's parents, Carol and Mike, shared their relief and anticipation. Mike said, "We've been through pure hell for the last 20 years. Now we're ready to put someone behind bars, get them prosecuted, and finally find some closure." Both expressed a desire to see Coy face the death penalty. Carol reflected, I sat down and read Exodus, where it says that if you take a life, there's a punishment. I want justice for my daughter. JB's mother did not speak with the media following Coy McRae's arrest, but she was thought to be as relieved as Tracy's parents to have an arrest made finally. Tracy's stepfather, Mike, and mother Carol felt the death penalty was warranted, as Coy had lived 20 years in freedom and he did not need another day on earth. I honestly believe that should be what happens, Carol said. JB's biological father, Hilton, remained skeptical. He wondered whether the police really had the right man. This is not the work of a single person, Hilton said. We may be wrong, but my attitude is, I just have to wait and evaluate. After Coy was indicted, the defense proceeded with preparation for trial by undertaking an investigation into two possible alternative suspects, one of whom was deceased, John Barentine, and the other a former Ozark police officer. The defense wished to imply that John might have committed the murders, but the prosecution successfully contended there was no evidence to support such a theory, and the judge granted the prosecution's motion, precluding any evidence concerning John. The former police officer theory stemmed from a 2015 blog post. A woman named Marina Crum claimed a former officer, while intoxicated, confessed to her involvement in the murders to cover up tapes showing local police involved in a drug trade. Marina's claims initially drew significant public attention, but during evidentiary hearings, she admitted she had fabricated the story. With both alternative suspects removed, the defense had to craft a new strategy. On April 19, 2023, a trial commenced against the 49-year-old Coy McRae under the direction of Alabama Attorney General Steve Marshall. In opening remarks, prosecutors gave a detailed look at the lives of JB and Tracy and the brighter futures both had that were tragically cut short. They had testified that on the night of July 31, 1999, after the girls became lost en route to a party, Coy accosted them at gunpoint outside the Big Little store in Ozark, then forced JB to drive into a marshy area and ordered her to undress Coy, then sexually assaulted JB before forcing the girls into the trunk of her car, shooting them both with a close-range shot, then moved the car onto Herring Avenue before walking home to his residence nearby. They also testified that the lack of vaginal trauma does not rule out a sexual assault, since such trauma may or may not appear both in consensual and non-consensual intercourse. The prosecution also called Coy's wife, Jeanette, to testify. She explained she was not married to Coy at the time of the murders, so no marital privileges applied. Jeanette testified that on July 30th, Coy returned from a long-haul trucking job. On the 31st, she went to work while Coy cleared land they had purchased. According to her, she arrived home around 8 p.m., and Coy returned shortly after 8:20 p.m., sweaty from working outside. He showered, and later, near 10:30 p.m., left to visit his mother, returning shortly before 1 a.m. Jeanette said Coy's clothes did not have any blood or mud on them. He informed her that his car had broken down at the Big Little store, and she rode with him to jumpstart the car. They returned home at 1:20 a.m., slept for several hours, and then went out to Walmart to pick up supplies for Coy's next trucking trip. They did not speak for several days afterwards, which was not unusual since Coy only had a pager. Jeanette also acknowledged that several days after the murders, her mother told her about the events occurring at Big Little store that night. She said she thought about calling police because she and Coy were in the same area at approximately the same time, but she never did. Jeanette testified that Coy's car had been broken down at the Big Little store that night, but there was no one else around, and nothing suspicious happened in her mind. She stated she had never heard anything to indicate that Coy had sex with or harmed JB and Tracy. Yet her testimony inadvertently placed Coy's car in the same parking lot as the girls on the night of the murders, and his DNA was found on JB. The defense said police arrested the wrong man. They alleged JB willingly had sex with Coy on the night she was murdered. According to their version of events, on July 31st, 23-year-old Coy met JB and Tracy at the Big Little store, gave them directions, and then jumped into JB's car. The three continued talking and eventually engaged in consensual sexual relations. Afterwards, the girls allegedly dropped Coy off at his house and someone else murdered JB and Tracy. This theory, however, strained credulity. JB and Tracy had already received directions from Marilyn and Muriel, were on their way to Tracy's house, and even called Tracy's boyfriend Wade to confirm their route. Why would they then entertain a random stranger? And why would Tracy passively stand by while her friend had sex with him, only for another person to coincidentally murder them immediately afterward? Despite this, the defense underscored that there was no proof Coy was the murderer. The only connection was his DNA from consensual sex, they argued. They also spoke to alleged misconduct in the wake of Coy's arrest in 2019, drawing a comparison to Nazi Germany. Coy had asked 8 times for an attorney, but was denied. He spent 25 hours in the interrogation room, sleeping on a mat on the floor. Chief Walker testified in rebuttal to this testimony. He testified that Coy was delayed booking into jail in order to await a search warrant and to tie up loose ends. Coy had been placed in a conference room and fed while he engaged in general conversation about high school sports, far removed from any discussion about the murder investigation. The defense put on very few witnesses. Dan Shaw, a newspaper delivery man, testified that at about 2:15 a.m., on August 1st, he saw a Mazda with its flashers on turn onto James Street from Herring Avenue. He passed the car several times, including one time when it was near a Mercury Grand Marquis with 2 adults and a juvenile inside. Dan thought the Mazda was an undercover police car at the time and did not give any more thought to the incident until he saw the Mazda's picture in the news and immediately telephoned the police. Another defense witness, Jimmy, who lived on Broad Street in 1999, remembered having seen a white truck and a Mazda at approximately 11:20 p.m. on July 31st. Both cars moved slowly, entered the lot, and turned off their lights. After a 15-minute pause, both cars drove towards the Big Little store. Jimmy remembered a silhouette of a man in the truck, but didn't catch anyone in the Mazda. Only much later, when he saw a picture of the Mazda in the newspaper, did he realize its importance. Coy McRae also took the stand in his own defense. Nervous and visibly shaking, he said he already knew JB, whom he called Jennifer. He said they met in June 1999 at a mall in Dothan when he dropped off his girlfriend Janet at work. He stopped at Radio Shack. JB happened to be nearby, and they struck up a conversation. Coy said JB gave him her phone number, and he gave her his mother's home number rather than his own, since he didn't have a cell phone and didn't want JB calling while his girlfriend was around. He said JB called that number the same day and again in July, and they made plans to meet whenever possible. The testimony immediately became contentious. Everyone who actually knew JB made it clear that she went by JB, short for James Buford, not Jennifer. Coy could not have known her real name, undermining the credibility of his version of events. However, Coy and JB did not actually see each other until the night of July 31st, the night she was murdered. It was an extraordinary coincidence that she got lost near his house, a place she had never been before. Coy testified that he came home from a long-haul trucking job on July 30th and parked his semi at a truck stop on County Road 18 because it was too big to park at home. On July 31st, he said he worked on the land he and Jeanette owned next to his mom's house. Around 3 p.m., he said JB, whom he referred to as Jennifer, called his mom's house, and they planned to meet at his old high school in Ozark at 10 p.m. The prosecution emphasized the sheer illogic of this story. The girls were lost in Ozark, with no idea where they were, and were headed in a completely different direction to go to this party. Coy tried to make it sound plausible. He said he later drove to the Big Little store to wait for JB until 10 p.m. No explanation was given as to why he waited at the store and not the high school. According to Coy, when JB didn't show up around 10 or 10:30 p.m., he returned to his mom's house, the only way she could contact him. Since she never called, he spent time with his family before leaving around 11:45 p.m. On the way home, he said, his car broke down, but somehow coasted into the Big Little parking lot. What an improbable coincidence. At the very moment the girls got lost, he ended up at the same location with a broken-down car. Coy testified that he looked around and saw JB at the payphone. He indicated he approached the girls and spoke to them. He said JB told him she was running late, whereupon he told her he knew a shortcut back to Dothan and asked if they could drop him off en route because his car was broken down. The girls agreed to this, and he got into the back seat of the Mazda. Coy testified that at 11:45 p.m., he and JB left the Big Little store. He opined that he and JB chatted while Tracy appeared preoccupied. 8 minutes later, they were near the truck stop where he parked his semi. He asked them if they wanted to stop and look at his truck. He and JB exited and got into the cab of the semi, while Tracy remained in the Mazda. Coy agreed that one thing led to another, and he and JB had sexual relations on a bed in the back of his semi. The defense asked if he had forced JB. He said, absolutely not. Afterwards, they returned to the Mazda. Coy claimed he asked to be dropped off on Broad Street to avoid being seen by Jeanette. The girls allegedly dropped him off around 12:30 a.m., after which he walked home. He said he then asked Jeanette to help jump his car at the Big Little store. They returned home around 1 a.m., after which Coy stayed home for the rest of the night. The next day, they went to Walmart before he left for another trucking trip. Coy said that he only knew of the murders weeks later when Jeanette told him. Yet he wanted the jury to believe that he never tried to contact JB again, that he didn't call, that he never followed up, and that it was a one-night accident. He claimed he was shocked when arrested, insisting he had no idea what it could be about. And he said he never told detectives he knew the girls because he was scared, thinking that once he was handcuffed, they'd already decided he was guilty. Coy also expected the jury to believe he never saw pictures of JB and Tracy in the newspapers or on TV. Even though the story dominated local media, he said he could not have recognized them even if he had, and therefore didn't come forward. During cross-examination, the prosecution systematically dismantled Coy's story. One major question: how did JB know to call his mother's house that night? Coy said he told her he was only home on weekends, so that's when she would call the prosecution, then showed a notepad of where they had written down Coy's statements about July 31st. They pointed out some glaring discrepancies. For one, Coy said that he was supposed to meet JB at 1 p.m., said it was a date. The prosecution indicated how unlikely it was that everything aligned that day, and Coy could only say, I guess. The prosecution established that Marielle and Marilyn had put Tracy on the phone with her mother at 11:40 p.m., but the women could not remember anyone else being there. Coy, however, testified that he had arrived around 11:35 p.m. He further testified that he and JB talked, then went to the back of his semi where they had sexual relations. He testified it was all very quick and was completed by midnight. The prosecution meticulously dismantled Coy's account. Every part of his story raised questions. The timeline didn't match the evidence. His actions didn't make sense, and he initially claimed not to know JB or Tracy at all. The prosecution argued that his story about consensual sex was fabricated to explain why his DNA was found on JB. They asserted that the dirt inside JB's jeans wasn't from consensual contact in a truck. It came from being attacked and forced to undress by someone she didn't know. They concluded that Coy shot the girls to avoid being identified, emphasizing that both victims would have been able to recognize him. The prosecution reminded the jury that when it came to all of the evidence together, a complete picture was created. They also reminded jurors that in order to find someone guilty, it wasn't always necessary for them to actually witness the crime. The defense, in closing arguments, insisted there was no evidence to link Coy directly to the murders. No fingerprints, no eyewitnesses, no proven motive. They said there was too much reasonable doubt. They surmised maybe the girls came across Coy by happenstance and agreed to give him a ride, but that someone else could have murdered them later. The implausibility of this scenario, given the timeline and presence of Coy's DNA, did not go unnoticed by observers. On April 26th, after less than a day of deliberation, the jury found Coy guilty on all counts. Some observers of the trial have remarked that Coy's own testimony may have convinced jurors of his guilt more than anything else in court. Despite the verdict, his friends and family refused to believe he was guilty. Supporters gathered outside the courthouse, holding signs reading "Coy Strong," adorned with Bible verses. Next came sentencing. Victim impact statements brought to light the depth of the loss Coy had perpetrated. JB's mother, Cheryl, said, "I thought I knew the meaning of devastation, trauma, and being broken. I have a hole inside me. It's not something you get over. I exist without her." Tracy's mother, Carol, spoke of holidays and milestones without her daughter, describing the challenge of shielding her sons from grief while trying to give them normal lives. The defense brought before the court mitigating factors: that Coy had no prior criminal history, he had been an active presence in his children's and grandchildren's lives, and he had been a productive member of his community. Coy's daughter Alicia spoke about growing up in a loving home, never seeing any aggression, while his wife Jeanette testified to his devotion as a father and partner. The prosecution concluded by reminding the jury that Coy had spent 20 years free after committing these crimes. They further mentioned that the man in the courtroom was not the same man who killed JB and Tracy. The killer was no godly man, but a rapist and murderer. The jury ultimately sentenced Coy to life in prison without parole, saving him from the death penalty. Alabama Attorney General Steve Marshall said, "For 23 years, the families of JB Beasley and Tracy Hollett have hoped and prayed for justice. While this result will not bring their loved ones back, it provides the delayed closure they deserve and reaffirms faith in the justice system. This verdict sends a clear message. We have no tolerance for those who callously take the lives of others, especially our youth." Coy's friends and family continued to protest the verdict, claiming his innocence. His official sentence was life without parole, while his appeal remains pending. Close to the spot where the Mazda was found, there is a memorial for JB and Tracy with flowers, crosses, and angel statues, a tribute that their lives, though gone well before their time, would never be forgotten. The resolution of this 23-year-long case brought relief, sorrow, and a measure of closure to Ozark. It was a testament to the perseverance of the families, the progress of forensic science, and the unyielding quest for justice, though no verdict could ever fill the void of two vibrant young lives. The case serves as both a warning and a memorial etched in the community's memory of the night two girls vanished in the decades-long journey to justice.